Do you ever wake up and feel like you're already losing a battle you didn't even know you were fighting? Like the air in your own home is heavy and every step you take feels like it might set something off? That's my reality most mornings. This morning was no different. I woke up just a little later than my partner, and for a moment I thought maybe today would be okay. But then I noticed she wasn't in the kitchen like she usually is. That's when it started, the tension, the unease, the feeling that I needed to brace myself for whatever was coming. When she finally spoke, it wasn't a greeting or a simple good morning. It was sharp, almost biting, and I felt that familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I've learned to tread carefully on days like this, to keep my voice calm, my words measured, and my presence as small as possible. Because when she's in one of these moods, it doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never the right thing. And yet, when she finally left for work, I felt something I haven't felt all morning: relief. I could breathe again, even if just for a little while. But that relief is always short-lived because I know she'll be back. And I never know which version of her I'll get when she walks through that door. This is my life. And today, I want to share what it's like to live in this constant state of uncertainty, to feel like you're losing yourself piece by piece. Maybe you'll see yourself in this story. Maybe you'll understand. Or maybe, like me, you just need to hear it out loud to remind yourself that it's real. I woke up this morning like I do every day, just a little later than my partner. For a moment, everything felt normal. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually means she's in the kitchen, finishing her morning routine. But as I got up and walked into the kitchen, something felt off. She wasn't there. The coffee machine was untouched, the counters were empty, and the air felt heavy. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was still in the bathroom. I called out, "Are you in there?" My voice was calm, casual, but her response hit me like a slap. Yes, she barked, sharp and irritated, as if my question had been an accusation. I froze for a second, that familiar sinking feeling settling in my stomach. I knew this tone. I knew what it meant. It was going to be one of those mornings. The kind where every word I say feels like stepping on a landmine. The kind where I have to tiptoe around her mood, hoping I don't make things worse. "Okay," I said softly, trying to keep my voice neutral. I turned back toward the kitchen, thinking I'd just make my coffee and wait until she was done. But before I could even take a step, the bathroom door flew open. She stood there, her face tight with frustration, and snapped, "You can't use the toilet." I blinked, caught off guard. "It's okay, I can wait," I said, trying to sound calm, trying to soften her mood. But she wasn't having it. She glared at me, her voice rising as she said, "I already flushed it twice, and it's not working." I stood there, unsure of what to say. What could I say? It wasn't my fault the toilet wasn't flushing, but the way she looked at me, the way she spoke, it felt like she was blaming me. Like I was somehow responsible for this minor inconvenience. In my head, I thought, why is she angry at me for something I can't control? But I didn't say it out loud. I knew better. I've learned that when she's in this kind of mood, there's no point in trying to reason with her. Anything I say will only make things worse. So I nodded and said, "Okay," again, keeping my voice as soft and neutral as possible. I turned back to the kitchen, hoping she'd let it go. Eventually, the toilet flushed, of course it did. It always does after an extra try. But that didn't matter. The damage was already done. I sat down at the kitchen table, my coffee still unmade. I didn't even want to move. When she's like this, I feel like my only job is to stay out of her way, to absorb her anger without making a sound. I've learned to make myself small, to disappear into the background until she leaves for work. But even as I sat there, trying to stay invisible, I couldn't shake the feeling of being blamed. It wasn't just the toilet. It was everything. Every little thing that went wrong seemed to land on my shoulders, whether I had anything to do with it or not. And the worst part? I couldn't even defend myself. Because if I did, if I said anything that even hinted at disagreement, it would only escalate. She'd get angrier, louder, and I'd end up feeling even worse. So I stayed quiet. I stayed still. And I waited for the storm to pass. These moments, these small, seemingly insignificant moments, they add up. They chip away at me piece by piece. It's not just about the toilet or her tone of voice. It's about the way I feel in these moments, helpless, invisible, like I'm walking on a tightrope that could snap at any second. And the worst part? This is just the beginning of the morning. I already knew deep down that it wasn't over. It never is. But for now, I stayed quiet. I stayed still. And I waited. Because that's all I could do. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, trying to keep my head down when she walked in. I could feel her presence before she even said a word. The air seemed to shift, and I braced myself, knowing that whatever came next wasn't going to be pleasant. She opened the fridge, then closed it again with a little more force than necessary. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for something, anything to latch onto. And then she found it. "Did you know the cistern is brown and discolored inside?" she asked, her tone sharp and accusatory. I froze for a moment, caught off guard. This wasn't the first time we talked about the cistern. We both knew it was stained from years of mineral buildup in the water. It wasn't pretty, but it wasn't harmful either. We'd even joked about it when we first moved in, calling it character for the house. But now in this moment, it wasn't a harmless quirk. It was a problem. And somehow it was my problem. "Yes," I said carefully, keeping my voice calm. "We've talked about it before. It's the same upstairs." "No, this one is worse," she snapped, her eyes narrowing as if I just contradicted her. I nodded, trying to defuse the situation. "Yeah, it's a shame," I said, hoping that would be enough to end the conversation. But it wasn't. She stood there, arms crossed, waiting for something more. I could feel her frustration radiating off her, and I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to fix it. Right now. But what could I do? It was 7:30 in the morning, and I had to start work in 30 minutes. Even if I had the time, what was I supposed to do about years of mineral buildup in the cistern? It wasn't something I could magically solve in the middle of a weekday morning. In my head, I thought, what can I do? I have to start work in 30 minutes. Why does everything feel like it's my fault? But I didn't say any of that out loud. I knew better. Instead, I just nodded again and said, "Yeah, it's too bad." She let out a frustrated sigh, as if my response wasn't good enough, and turned her attention to the counter. I stayed seated, my hands resting on the table, trying to make myself as small as possible. This wasn't new. This was a pattern. She had a way of identifying problems, big or small, and presenting them as though they were emergencies that needed to be solved immediately. And if I didn't have a solution, or if I didn't respond the way she wanted, it became my fault. It didn't matter if the problem was out of my control, like the toilet not flushing, or something we'd both known about for months, like the cistern. In her eyes, I was the one who had failed. And the worst part? I didn't even have the energy to argue. I was too tired, too worn down from mornings like this, to push back. So I stayed quiet. I stayed still. But inside, I felt the frustration building. It wasn't just about the cistern. It was about everything. The way she spoke to me, the way she looked at me, the way she made me feel like I was constantly falling short. I wanted to say, "I'm doing my best. I'm trying. But I can't fix everything. I can't be everything you need me to be." But I didn't, because I knew it wouldn't make a difference. So I sat there, staring at the table, while she moved around the kitchen, her frustration filling the room. I didn't even bother making my coffee. What was the point? I knew I wouldn't be able to enjoy it. When she's in these moods, I feel like my only purpose is to absorb her anger, to be the target for her frustration. And the worst part is, I've started to believe it. I've started to believe that maybe it really is my fault. Maybe I should have done something about the cistern. Maybe I should have fixed the toilet. Maybe I should have been better, done better. But deep down, I know that's not true. I know that no matter what I do, it will never be enough. Because it's not about the cistern or the toilet or the coffee. It's about something bigger, something I can't fix. And that's the hardest part. Knowing that no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I give, it will never be enough. So I sat there, silent and still, waiting for her to leave, because that's all I could do. As I sat at the kitchen table, still trying to keep my head down and avoid any further conflict, she walked back into the room. Her movements were sharp, deliberate, and I could tell she wasn't done. There was always something else. There was always another problem to solve, another thing I hadn't done right. She stopped in the doorway and looked at me, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she said, "Should we close the bedroom window now?" It was such a simple question, but I knew better than to take it at face value. There was always an edge to these kinds of questions, a hidden layer of expectation or criticism. I thought for a moment and said, "I don't think so. I usually leave it open for longer to air the room out." I tried to keep my tone light, casual, as if this was just a normal conversation. But I could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She didn't like my answer. Without saying another word, she turned and walked toward the bedroom. I stayed where I was, listening as she opened the door and closed the window herself. I didn't follow her. I didn't say anything. What was the point? She had already made up her mind. I sat there, staring at the table, feeling that familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Why ask for my opinion if you're going to ignore it? I thought to myself. It wasn't the first time this had happened. She had a way of framing things as questions, as if she wanted my input. But the truth was, she didn't. She had already decided what she was going to do. My opinion didn't matter. A few minutes later, she came back into the kitchen. I glanced up at her, hoping the window incident was over. But it wasn't. She looked at me, her face a mix of frustration and disgust, and said, "It needs to stay open for longer. The bedroom stinks. It's disgusting." Her words hit me like a slap. I didn't know what to say. I had just told her to leave the window open, but she had ignored me, closed it anyway, and now she was blaming me for the smell. I nodded, keeping my mouth shut. Anything I said would only make things worse. If I pointed out that I had suggested leaving the window open, she'd accuse me of being argumentative. If I apologized, she'd take it as an admission of guilt. There was no winning. Inside, I felt a wave of frustration and helplessness. It wasn't about the window. It was never about the window. It was about control. She needed to be the one to make the decision, even if it contradicted what I had said. She needed to assert her authority to remind me that she was in charge. And me? I felt invisible. Like my thoughts, my opinions, my voice didn't matter. I was just there, a bystander in my own life, watching as she made decisions for both of us. I wanted to say, "Why did you even ask me? Why do you always do this?" But I didn't. I couldn't. I knew it wouldn't change anything. Instead, I sat there, silent and still, while she moved around the kitchen, her frustration filling the room. I felt small, like I was shrinking with every passing moment. This wasn't just about the window. It was about everything. The way she spoke to me, the way she dismissed my opinions, the way she made me feel like I didn't matter. And the worst part? I had started to believe it. I had started to believe that maybe I really didn't matter. That maybe my thoughts and feelings weren't important. I sat there, staring at the table while she moved around the kitchen, her presence looming over me like a shadow. I didn't even bother making my coffee. What was the point? When she's in these moods, I feel like my only purpose is to absorb her anger, to be the target for her frustration. And the worst part is, I've started to believe it. Maybe I should have done something about the cistern. Maybe I should have fixed the toilet. Maybe I should have been done better. But deep down, I know that's not true. I know that no matter what I do, it will never be enough. Because it's not about the cistern or the toilet or the coffee. It's about something bigger, something I can't fix. And that's the hardest part. Knowing that no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I give, it will never be enough. So I sat there, silent and still, waiting for her to leave. Because that's all I could do. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, trying to keep my head down when she opened the fridge. I could hear the sound of the door swinging open, the clinking of jars and containers as she rummaged through the shelves. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I could already feel the tension building, the weight of her frustration filling the room. "What can I eat?" she asked, her tone sharp and impatient. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. I always try to make sure there's something quick and easy for her to take to work, especially on days when I haven't prepared anything in advance. But I hadn't had the chance to check the fridge this morning, and I wasn't sure what was in there. She pulled out a container of old takeaway leftovers and held it up like it was evidence in a trial. "Is this still good?" she asked, her voice laced with irritation. I glanced at the container, trying to remember how long it had been in there. "I don't think so," I said cautiously. "It's been in there for a few too many days, I think." Her face darkened, and I could see the anger rising in her eyes. Without saying a word, she shoved the container back into the fridge with a force that made the shelves rattle. She didn't throw it away. She didn't even close the fridge door. She just left it there as if to make a point. I sat there, frozen, unsure of what to do. I wanted to get up and throw the container away myself, but I knew that would only make things worse. She would see it as an insult, as if I were criticizing her for not doing it. So, I stayed where I was, my hands resting on the table, my heart pounding in my chest. "What can I eat then?" she demanded, her voice rising. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice calm. "If you check the cupboard, there should be some noodles and things in there," I said. She walked over to the cupboard and opened it, her movements sharp and deliberate. She grabbed something without looking at me, her frustration still palpable. I sat there, watching her out of the corner of my eye, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I always try to make sure there's food in the house, that there's something easy for her to grab on mornings like this. I go out of my way to stock up on things I know she likes, things that are quick and convenient, but it never seems to be enough. No matter how much I plan, no matter how much effort I put in, there's always something wrong. The food isn't fresh enough, or it's not what she wanted, or it's my fault for not preparing something in advance. I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, the constant pressure to anticipate her needs, to avoid her anger, to keep the peace. And yet, despite all of that, I still felt like I was failing. In my head, I thought, I can't win. No matter what I do, it's never enough. She closed the cupboard and turned to me, her expression unreadable. "I'm leaving," she said abruptly, her voice cold and final. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to say something, anything, to make her understand how tired I was, how much I was struggling. But I knew it wouldn't make a difference. She walked toward the door, and for a moment, I thought she was gone. But then she came back, standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on me. "Is something wrong with you?" she asked, her tone accusatory. I hesitated, my mind racing. I wanted to tell her the truth, to say that yes, something was wrong. That I was tired, that I felt unappreciated, that I was struggling to keep up with her constant demands and criticisms. But I knew that if I said any of that, it would only make things worse. She would get angry, accuse me of being dramatic, of making everything about myself. So, I said the only thing I could. "I'm just a little stressed," I said quietly. She stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the kitchen. The moment she was gone, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I got up from the table and threw the old leftovers in the bin, started a load of laundry, and filled the dishwasher. I moved through the house like a ghost, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But the relief was short-lived. I knew she would be back, and I didn't know which version of her I would get. Would she be sweet and apologetic, telling me she loved me and that I was a good person? Or would she be cold and distant, punishing me with her silence? I didn't know. And that uncertainty, that constant state of walking on eggshells, was the hardest part. I sat back down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where she had been. I felt like a shadow of the person I used to be, like I was losing myself piece by piece. And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just about the food, or the window, or the cistern. It was about everything. It was about the way she made me feel, the way she dismissed my efforts, the way she made me question my own worth. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I was too tired, too drained, too numb. So I sat there, staring at the table, waiting for the day to begin. Because that's all I could do. She had just said she was leaving. The words hung in the air, cold and final, and I thought for a moment that it was over. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where she had been, trying to process the morning. My chest felt tight, my stomach churned, but at least she was gone. At least I could breathe. But then, just as quickly as she had left, the door swung open again. My heart sank. I didn't even have time to collect myself before she was standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on me with that familiar look of frustration. "Is something wrong with you?" she asked, her voice sharp and accusatory. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze, unsure of how to respond. I could feel my pulse quicken, my mind racing. I knew this was a trap. If I said no, she'd accuse me of being passive-aggressive, of sulking. But if I said yes, if I admitted that something was wrong, it would only make things worse. I hesitated, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting, demanding an answer. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "Yes." My voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but the word felt heavy, like it carried the weight of everything I'd been holding in. Her expression didn't change. She just stood there, waiting for me to continue, and I knew I had to say more. I knew I had to explain myself, even though I didn't want to. "I just feel a bit stressed," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "with work and this morning." I paused, trying to find the right words, trying to tread carefully. It's hard when I feel like my opinions don't matter. Like with the window, I said I thought we should leave it open, but you closed it anyway. And then you said the room smelled, like it was my fault. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to say too much. I didn't want to push her too far, but I couldn't keep it all inside anymore. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her face unreadable. And then, suddenly, her expression shifted. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line, and I could see the anger rising in her. "Don't compare me to work," she snapped, her voice loud and sharp. I flinched, the force of her words hitting me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to respond, to try to explain that I wasn't comparing her to work, but she didn't give me the chance. "You always do this," she continued, her voice rising. "You make everything about you. You act like I'm the problem, like I'm the one who's making your life difficult. But maybe you should look at yourself for once." Her words cut deep, each one like a dagger to my chest. I wanted to defend myself, to tell her that I wasn't trying to make it about me, that I was just trying to be honest about how I felt. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the table, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. She stood there for a moment longer, her anger still simmering, and then she turned and walked out the door. This time, she didn't come back. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the house, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But it was a hollow relief, tinged with sadness and exhaustion. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been, replaying the conversation in my head. Her words echoed in my mind, over and over again. "Don't compare me to work. You always do this. Maybe you should look at yourself." I felt small, insignificant, like my feelings didn't matter. Even Even when I tried to be honest, to open up and share what I was going through, it wasn't enough. My feelings were invalidated, dismissed, twisted into something they weren't. And the worst part, I wasn't even surprised. This wasn't the first time this had happened. It was just another moment in a long pattern of moments. Another reminder that my voice didn't matter, that my needs didn't matter. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I was too tired, too drained, too numb. So I sat there, staring at the table, waiting for the day to begin, because that's all I could do. In that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just about the window or the food or the cistern. It was about everything. It was about the way she made me feel, the way she dismissed my efforts, the way she made me question my own worth. I felt like a shadow of the person I used to be, like I was losing myself piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to find myself again. So I sat there, alone in the kitchen, the sound of the door slamming still echoing in my ears, and I waited, because that's all I could do. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the house, and for a moment, I just sat there, frozen. My hands were still clenched in my lap, my chest tight, my mind racing. But then slowly I exhaled. She was gone. I stayed seated for a few more moments, letting the silence settle around me. It was a strange kind of silence, not peaceful, not comforting, but still better than the tension that had filled the house just minutes ago. I could feel the weight lifting just a little, as if I could finally take a full breath. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, and walked over to the fridge. The container of old leftovers was still sitting there, right where she had shoved it back onto the shelf. I stared at it for a moment, the sight of it stirring up a mix of emotions, frustration, sadness, exhaustion. Then, without thinking too much about it, I grabbed it and threw it in the bin. It was such a small act, but it felt significant. Like I was reclaiming a tiny bit of control, even if it was just over something as trivial as a container of food. From there, I moved through the house almost mechanically. I started a load of laundry, the sound of the washing machine filling the quiet. I loaded the dishwasher, wiping down the counters as I went. I wasn't even thinking about what I was doing. It was just something to keep my hands busy, something to distract me from the knot of emotions still sitting in my chest. As I worked, I felt a flicker of relief. She was gone, at least for now. The house was mine again, even if only for a few hours. I didn't have to watch my words, didn't have to brace myself for the next sharp comment or angry glare. I could just exist. But the relief was fleeting. Because even as I moved through the house, trying to find some sense of normalcy, I couldn't stop thinking about the moment she would come back. Would she walk through the door with a smile, acting as if nothing had happened? Would she be sweet and apologetic, telling me she loved me, that she didn't mean to snap at me? Or would she be cold and distant, punishing me with her silence, making me feel like I was the one who had done something wrong? I didn't know. I never knew. And that unpredictability was exhausting. I sat back down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where she had been. The house was quiet now, but my mind wasn't. I kept replaying the morning in my head, over and over again, dissecting every word, every look, every moment. I thought about the way she had dismissed my feelings, the way she had twisted my words, the way she had made me feel small and insignificant. And I thought about how this wasn't new. This was just another morning in a long string of mornings, another reminder of how much I had lost. Before we met, I was on track to start a PhD. I had dreams, ambitions, a sense of purpose. I used to feel confident, capable, like I had something to offer the world. But now I felt like a shadow of the person I used to be. I couldn't even recognize myself anymore. I had become so focused on keeping the peace, on avoiding conflict, on trying to meet her endless expectations that I had lost sight of who I was. I thought about the way I used to wake up in the mornings, excited for the day ahead. Now, I woke up with a knot in my stomach, dreading the first interaction, bracing myself for the first sign of tension. I thought about the way I used to feel proud of my accomplishments, the way I used to dream about the future. now, I felt like I was just going through the motions, trying to survive each day without falling apart. And the worst part? I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to find myself again. I sat there, staring at the table, the sound of the washing machine humming in the background. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud, filled with thoughts I couldn't escape. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I was too tired, too drained, too numb. So I just sat there waiting for the day to begin, because that's all I could do. And as I sat there, I realized something. This wasn't just about the morning. It wasn't just about the window, or the food, or the cistern. It was about everything. It was about the way she made me feel, the way she dismissed my efforts, the way she made me question my own worth. It was about the way I had lost myself in this relationship, the way I had let her needs and her moods overshadow everything else. I wanted to believe that things could get better, that I could find a way to reclaim the person I used to be. But in that moment, sitting alone in the kitchen, I didn't know how. So I stayed there, staring at the table, the sound of the washing machine filling the silence. And I waited, because that's all I could do. I sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space in front of me, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself really think about how I felt. Not just about this morning, but about everything. About the way my life had become this endless cycle of anger and blame, of walking on eggshells and trying to avoid conflict. I felt trapped in a routine that I didn't know how to break, in a relationship that was supposed to make me feel loved and supported but instead left me feeling small and invisible. Every day felt like a battle and I was losing. I thought about how isolated I'd become. I didn't have anyone to talk to about this. No friends, no family, no support network. I drifted away from the people who used to be in my life, partly because I didn't have the energy to maintain those relationships anymore, and partly because I was too ashamed to admit what was happening. How do you tell someone that the person you love, the person you chose to build a life with, makes you feel like this? How do you explain that you feel like a stranger in your own home, like you're constantly walking a tightrope, trying not to fall? I felt so alone. And the worst part was I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't even know where to start. I thought about the person I used to be, the person I was before this relationship. I used to feel confident, capable, like I had something to offer the world. I had dreams, ambitions, a sense of purpose. But now I felt like a shadow of that person. Like I'd been chipped away at piece by piece until there was almost nothing left. And yet I stayed. I stayed because I kept telling myself that things would get better, that this was just a rough patch, that if I tried harder, if I gave more, if I was better, it would all work out. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. Because it wasn't about me. It was about her. About her need for control, her inability to see me as a person with my own thoughts and feelings. I sat there, staring at the table, and I asked myself a question I'd been avoiding for a long time. Is this what love is supposed to feel like? And now I want to ask you the same question. Have you ever felt like this? Like you're losing yourself in a relationship that's supposed to make you feel loved and supported? Like you're giving everything you have and it's still not enough? If you have, I want you to know that you're not alone. I know how isolating it can feel, how hard it is to admit that something is wrong. But you don't have to go through it alone. If you're in a situation like this, please reach out to someone. A friend, a family member, a therapist, anyone who can listen and support you. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to know what the next step is. But just talking to someone, just saying the words out loud can make a difference. And if you're not ready to talk to someone else, start by being honest with yourself. Take a moment to really think about how you feel, about what you want and need. Because your feelings matter. Your needs matter. You matter. I know it's hard. I know it feels impossible sometimes. But you deserve to feel loved and supported. You deserve to feel like you're enough just as you are. So, if you're watching this and you're feeling trapped, if you're feeling like you've lost yourself, I want you to know that there's hope. There's a way out. It might not be easy and it might not happen overnight, but it's possible. Take care of yourself. Reach out to someone. And remember, you're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there feel a little less alone, a little less invisible. Because you're not invisible, you're not alone, and you deserve so much more than this.
Thanks for watching.
Like and subscribe.